a little while ago, and she asked me to give a talk on South Africa's renewable energy industry and how it relates to the fourth industrial revolution. And just as a qualification, I'm not an expert on the fourth industrial revolution, but I've tried to upskill myself a little bit for this talk. And I figured it makes the most sense to discuss where the renewable energy industry is at currently in this presentation before we get into what the future looks like. So this is kind of an overview presentation, and then towards the end, we talk about some of the fourth industrial revolution applications. Okay, so yeah, this is just an outline for the presentation. I'll give a brief intro. I'll talk about some of the drivers and barriers for the renewable industry here, and then wrapping up with some of the opportunities for the fourth industrial revolution. So a little bit more about myself and my company. So my company focuses on research, policy, and advisory in the clean energy industry. I've worked on a wide range of projects since I started the company about 8 years ago. That's about the time when I also moved to South Africa from the US. But I've worked on projects from helping impact investors identify projects in clean energy and solar, doing market research for energy companies, as well as writing energy policy. So it's been pretty varied depending on the client needs. My background is in engineering, but a lot of the work I do is more on the advisory side of the industry now. Okay, so getting back into the drivers and barriers for the renewable energy industry. So we're currently in a clean energy revolution, if you want to call it that, in South Africa. It still kind of operates on government timelines, at least for the utility scale side of the industry. So it kind of has this stop-start state currently. But some of the key drivers for that, for this industry, are the significant cost improvements. We've seen solar and wind turbine technology prices come down significantly. We're also seeing a need to diversify the economy away from just a coal dependency, and also create more jobs, which is leading to more growth in other industries like renewables, which tends to be more job intensive than the coal industry, for example. And also there's pressures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to combat climate change. And we're also seeing some support internationally to do that, from the Paris Climate Agreement to even commitments that South Africa has made to the Paris Climate Accord. So in terms of the history of the industry, South Africa's industry, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with it, but it kind of began, the utility scale industry kind of took off back in 2011. So these are large projects, mostly solar PV sites and wind turbine sites, but there are also some concentrating solar power, biomass, and small hydro projects that were built as part of South Africa's Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. And to date, the country has procured over 6 gigawatts of power, mostly from wind and solar, and that's made up about 90 projects across the country. So if you've been driving recently in South Africa and you've driven past a large wind farm or a large solar farm, it's likely come out of this procurement program. And if you compare the prices that we've seen in these, there were four and a half rounds of procurement. Every round the prices have dropped for solar and winds especially. And you'll see now that the latest round which was priced back in 2016, both solar and wind came in very low for prices, and much lower than what South Africa is currently trying to build for their Medupi and Kusile coal plants. So it basically shows that the price of renewables has come down so much that it's kind of made building new coal uneconomic in a lot of ways, even when you don't factor in the greenhouse gas emission costs or the pollution impacts. So in terms of the other trends that we're seeing in enabling regulations for the industry, there are now there are wheeling rules in South Africa. So you can have you can be an IPP or have your own generation facility and sell to another customer across the transmission or distribution lines. You just have to apply for a wheeling license to do that. So that is another avenue for building some of these projects and finding customers to buy that electricity. There's also embedded generation tariffs now in a number of municipalities where customers that want to install their own generation, either like a solar panel on their roof or some other form, can do that and then sell their excess electricity back to the utility, usually at a reduced rate from the price that they buy from that municipality. So these are two regulations now that are kind of in place and are opening up more business models for renewables. Another trend that we're seeing, which is contributing to the growth in this industry, is the rising prices from Eskom, which are passed on to the municipalities. And currently, it's already economic for a lot of customers. It's cheaper for customers to put solar on their roof and buy electricity or use electricity from a solar panel than it is to buy from their local utility, especially for large commercial and industrial customers. Since there are over 200 municipalities across the country, and they each have like a dozen or so different tariff categories and tariff customer types, it's difficult to generalize. But if you look at a lot of the major municipalities, their commercial tariffs are pretty high and higher than what it costs to generate solar on your roof. So you probably have seen a lot of shopping malls and shopping centers with solar panels on the roofs already, and some residential customers, but it still has yet to spread as widely in the residential sector. So in terms of new business models that are emerging from these trends, we'll discuss that here. So yeah, these are some examples of new business models that we're seeing with some of the technology advancements. Microgrids, for example, this applies more to smaller scale installations in remote communities. Since South Africa has, I think, an 85% connection rate to the grid, microgrids are less common here than outside of South Africa. But I think Eskom did just recently build a microgrid pilot facility in a rural community in South Africa. And there are a number of larger customers that are doing this in remote areas. Like if you think of game farms that don't have grid connection, microgrids make sense in those applications. We're also seeing standalone products and systems. So anything from the solar jar, you may have seen that. That's an example of a new product that wasn't available as of a few years ago, before battery technology came down, our prices came down, and LED lights became available, which are also very efficient. That allows you to power an LED light with a small little solar panel the size of a jar lid. We're also seeing, in terms of I guess the most obvious fourth industrial revolution application is smart appliances as kind of the next step for this industry. I think if you think about what we're currently experiencing, I think today it's Eskom announced they're going to be load shedding again for stage 1. And you can think of one application: if you have smart appliances in your home and a battery system, you can, if Eskom does cut off your power, you can switch to your battery system and still power your key appliances like your refrigerator, things that you don't want to turn off when the municipality cuts your power. So there already are applications for this technology, which is helpful to think about now. In terms of other potential applications, if you're thinking beyond just the customer applications with smart appliances, if you look at the utility applications, there are quite a few when you're thinking about smart grids and big data. I mean, the utility collects quite a bit of data, more data than they know what to do with, even with current technology. And future technology is projected to collect more data on customers and on grid operability. So the more data that the utilities collect, the more that they'll need to make sense of that and apply it. So some applications are improving response time to outages. If there are sensors built into the grid infrastructure, the utility can more quickly respond and fix faults where they exist and reduce outages. So that's one example. And then another one is collecting data on customers and providing better services to customers. If you know how they're using their energy and when during the day, maybe you can make suggestions to the customer on how they can save energy or switch their load or some of their appliances to operate during other times during the day to take advantage of off-peak rates. And you can even automate some of those applications. If you have smart appliances and you want to give control to the utility, for example, they can be in charge of switching on and off certain appliances that you're not concerned about that are running in the background if they see a need to cut power for some of the network. There's also applications, if you look at quite a few for batteries or electric cars, if you want to give the ability for the authority to utilities to operate those batteries, that's another source of income for customers if they want to sell electricity to the utility during certain times. The utility may call on customers to shift their battery load back to the grid and meet kind of a surge in demand or peak period demand. So that's one application as well. You can also go further and think, well, if you have electric cars and electric cars are automated and self-driving cars, you can give the ability for those cars to go back and plug into the grid and discharge some of their battery to support the network in certain areas that need it. So there's another application as well. But I think that covers a lot of the obvious ones that came up when I was doing some research on this. Maybe we could open up for discussion now and see if other people have other ideas for how the fourth industrial revolution could be applied to the clean energy sector here.
Good, thank you, Chris. I think if everyone's okay, you can probably unshare your screen.
Okay, let's see.
Perfect. Okay, I think I've got a couple of questions that maybe you can answer. I think, there's a lot of things happening in the renewable energy domain, and I know that there's a lot of people playing in this domain as well, and I wanted to know, is just how do the energy companies, the solar energy companies, stay aware of government initiatives? And what typical government initiatives are you aware of? Where are they moving in terms of utilizing this technology in order to solve some of the South African energy challenges?
The government, South Africa's government usually publishes their procurement program through their IPP office, Independent Power Producer Office. So they've run a number of rounds of procurement for the utility scale industry over the last few years. And if you want to follow that, you can go to I think they have a website, IPP Renewables or IPP DOE, and you can see what their future procurement plans are. Right now, they're kind of in limbo because they've published this integrated resource plan, and they're trying to finalize that. And once this resource plan is finalized, then that'll inform kind of future procurement rounds over the next 5 to 10 years or so.
Okay, good. I think then what I'll do is I'll probably via email just get the direct link to that environment from you, and maybe start creating spaces on our current forum platform. Typically, with these type of government entities, the links to what they're currently doing and what they're currently busy with, because I think that would help the members of the forum also knowing who's busy with what and what's the status, and they have a central place to access that if they would like to do so. Then maybe in terms of businesses providing solar solutions such as yourself, what are the typical challenges that you're facing within your business in terms of scaling your business to support the future? You know, what type of things are threatening those businesses?
So my business is more focused on advisory and consulting than it is on scaling the solar industry, but I work with a lot of solar companies, and I can speak from their perspective a little bit about scaling. I think for the utility scale industry, that is very much government driven by these procurement rounds, and because Eskom is a monopoly in a lot of respects still, the market's not fully open to anyone that wants to enter into the market. Usually you still have to get a license, or you have to get a PPA or a contract signed with Eskom to be the off-taker of your electricity. To some extent you can do a wheeling agreement, but not many people have done that yet, and it's kind of complicated to do it. So that's the challenge with the large scale projects. The smaller scale projects, I think that's actually growing at a much faster rate now than the larger projects in terms of the number of projects installed per day. For example, there's a lot of customers that are installing this, and you don't need government approval or a license to do that if you're below a certain size. So I think the threshold is below 1 megawatt. So if you're installing solar systems that are less than a megawatt, you don't need a license from NERSA to do that. So that's growing at a different rate. I think the other barriers, there are other support mechanisms that NERSA could put in place and could be clear on with their embedded generation tariffs nationally. There are a lot of rules amongst specific municipalities that have embedded generation tariffs, but there needs to be more guidance from the national regulator.
Okay. 2 more questions, unless someone else wants to pop in right now, and then I can carry on with some more questions later.
I wanted to ask, in terms of the sort of quality of renewable energy installations in South Africa, and in terms of like their future-proofness, we're talking about IoT and connecting devices and creating grids that we can share utilities across. How future forward are the installations that are happening in South Africa at the moment? Any opinions on that?
Well, I think the large scale projects, the utility scale projects, those are built to meet the demand, or to meet the contract requirements. So that I wouldn't call those specifically that advanced. They're basically just built to kind of minimize costs and be competitive. So that it's mainly just the generation technology. There isn't typically storage coupled with a lot of those installations, except for maybe the concentrated solar power projects. But that's not battery storage. That's like a thermal heat storage that they use. But for smaller scale installations like rooftop installations, there are, I think, a lot of cases now where customers are opting to install batteries with their solar system plus a smart inverter. And with that capability, you can do things like control your battery output on your phone, for example, or you can connect and island your system and disconnect it from the grid. And if you have load shedding, for example, you can create a little mini island so your battery and inverter go directly to powering your refrigerator or just a few smaller appliances. So there are some customers already doing that, but I think the cost of batteries is still fairly high. It's dropping every year, so every year it becomes more affordable, but not everyone can afford a battery yet.
Anything else, Alicia? Good. Okay. So,
sorry,
maybe, yes, Mark.
Sorry, I just wanted to chip in with questions here. Sorry, man. Chris, I just want to find out which has got which country is really leading the drive on renewables on the African continent, and then which type of renewable or clean energy is the most complex regarding construction and value chain. That and so what I'm interested in is the local content side. Like, how much opportunity is there for South Africans to be involved in local production, manufacturing of these various bits of the system, and which is the most complex, and then maintenance of these various systems. What's that sort of looking like? Have we got good maintenance happening around the installations? So, first of all, which country is really pushing ahead on the African continent? Which is the most complex type of installation? The value chains, nice complex value chains, and then maintenance of it. And then the last question is, utilities-wise, which utilities are really driving ahead? Payment for these kind of systems, what's that looking like as well? I mean, someone's got to pay for the energy at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In terms of the country, and it depends on what size systems you're looking at. South Africa has been a leader, I think, in the larger scale, utility scale projects within Africa. They were, this procurement program that they kind of spearheaded was one of the first of its kind, and pretty successful in terms of driving down prices and having a competitive auction. The big challenge, though, was with the Zuma administration, there was a 3-year delay for round 4 contracts to be signed, and there was different reasons for that. Some people speculated it was because Zuma wanted this nuclear project built, and so it kind of put a halt to any other development for a while. And also there was a conflict with Eskom not wanting to sign those contracts for whatever reason. I think because they had a conflict of interest with their generation assets. So yeah, South Africa has been a leader, but there have been delays, and now other countries are also installing kind of one-off projects. They don't have the same demand, especially the Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa countries. They have a much smaller energy demand than South Africa. So they're installing projects, but not at the same scale as here. In terms of local content, it depends on which technology you're talking about. For solar, we used to have solar assembly facilities. There used to be a number of them, and there were requirements within the procurement program that I think X percentage of local content needed to be procured for all of these projects. It started a mini manufacturing sector for a while, but the delays in South Africa actually put those industries out of business. So we did have several solar assembly, module assembly facilities closed down over the last couple of years. And I think there was also a wind turbine tower manufacturer in South Africa that also, I think, recently closed down. So the local content is nice in theory, but you have to have the steady demand to support those facilities. Otherwise, they don't make sense to build. In terms of maintenance, maintenance for the large scale projects is built into the contracts. So whoever does has the part of the O&M contract, they maintain it, and it does create a number of jobs, from like cleaning the solar panels manually to servicing the turbines on a regular basis. And then I think your last question was about utility payments.
Yeah, utilities. How's that integration or implementation in, like we struggle with a lot of the municipalities in that not maintaining their infrastructure. How's that looking?
Well, for the large projects, though the contracts are with Eskom, so Eskom pays for that electricity. and it's maintained by an independent company, by the IPP. So the maintenance has been fine on those since they have a financial incentive to maintain them and sell the energy back to ESCOM. For this other projects like municipal level projects, it depends who owns the project. I think, there haven't been a lot of municipal off-taker renewable energy projects yet. Typically, it's the customer that installs it themselves and then sells the electricity back to the municipality. Okay. So the customer's in charge of the maintenance in that sense, and I think it's up to the customer if they to maintain it themselves. And there are companies now that service solar panels on a regular basis, so it's not a big barrier to these projects.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so from my side, I probably want to ask another question in terms of future cost of renewable energy solutions. I mean, obviously with demands rising and the infrastructure on the ESCOM side maybe decaying to a certain extent, do you foresee that prices of solar solutions will increase or decrease as a result? Or do we see an overall decrease in future in solar cost or renewable energy solutions?
Well, it's pretty much decreased every year for the last decade, and the trend is typically going down, but it's at what rate? How fast can it continue to decrease? I think is the question. It's now become more of a commodity market with solar, in that it's up to the supply and the demand of the products themselves, like the silicon wafers. Like what is the supply internationally doing, and that may change the local prices to some extent. So every year the technology installation costs are coming down, which drives the price down. And now we're at a point where it's really just the materials plus some installation costs, which are driving the price. But I think if you want to compare the price of solar PV to conventional alternatives, it's going to always be lower now, depending on where. Like if you compare it to coal, it's always going to be cheaper and continue to go down at least at some rate. Okay, and my last question is, I mean, obviously there's a lot of adoption of renewable energies and solar solutions in South Africa recently, but some customers still sort of do the exercise. I mean, I know out of experience that we've done a number of exercises where we ask people to do proposals and then we don't end up implementing. So from your experience, what is normally preventing businesses from initially doing the installation, and maybe, where do you think the pitfalls are that generally people see, which is maybe myths or should be debunked? So your question is, what's preventing customers from installing it? Why wouldn't they want to install a system? Correct, yeah. So what's your general feel on what are the reasons why people, they set off to get proposals and then they don't end up installing? Or they perhaps perceiving certain negatives about it that is not quite true? Okay, that makes sense. I think the two big drivers for why a customer would install it, one is improve reliability, and I think that's the biggest one. If you're having issues with your local municipality and regular outages, you want to improve reliability. So that's one big driver. The second one is price, and if you're going to reduce the price for what you're currently paying and save costs. If a customer chooses not to install it, I think it's probably for one of those two reasons why they don't think it's going to add value. So either that their current grid connection isn't that bad, they might as well just stick with buying electricity from the municipality. They don't really need a backup system at the moment, or they're paying a fairly low price already, and the solar won't save them that much to make it worth the installation. Typically the cost for these solar systems is all in the upfront installation, and then there's no fuel cost. There's very little maintenance required on an ongoing basis. So if the customer doesn't have that money up front or can't get the financing up front, that's also a potential barrier. But now I think a lot of the installers have their own financing that they can offer customers, so that's become less of an issue.
Thank you very much. I think that answers my question. Mark, you got a question?
Yes, I just want to know, Chris, I'm a large industrial smelter or a factory in that. What's the route? What sort of renewable energy do I use? What's the case studies overseas? What are they doing around large industrial power hungry plants? Or am I doomed to using coal forever and a day, or nuclear?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not as familiar with smelter applications for renewables, but it works like any other facility. It's just the amount of electricity is a lot higher for a smelter than it would be for a typical commercial scale customer. So I think you would need a really big system with probably a big battery to make it work. I actually don't see an off-grid smelter making sense anytime soon. For example, you're still going to have a grid connection, but if you want to reduce some of your energy costs, which part of your balance, then you're gonna then you could install some solar to supplement your existing electricity usage.
And on mining operations, like in the DRC, like remote mining operations, has there been a take up on renewables for them?
Yeah, definitely. Especially anyone that's burning diesel with backup generators, solar can do it much cheaper. So it makes sense to either replace that system with a battery and solar hybrid, or do a diesel generator with a hybrid solar battery system.
Is that happening? Is that taking place with these replacement? Or, it's not just the marketing. It says it's a good idea. Is there actual take up on this?
At Larala Diamond Mine, their camp was powered by solar panels, and then they had diesel generators for their larger equipment on site. So there was a mix there in Botswana of diesel and solar.
Yeah, that's true, and it is happening in a lot of places. I think the one challenge is how long these mines are going to stay open, and I think to make it worthwhile, you typically want to have this equipment for like a few years, 5 to 10 years. But if you're going to be only open for a couple of years as a mine, it may not make sense for you to do that.
But like a generator, you could simply move your solar panels or sell them, or they're not
local, the host community. You could leave it on for the host community maybe as a project.
Chris, I had one more question, just leading on from some of the points that Johan was making. Do you have any ideas on what the sort of return on investment is on like a solar installation or a wind installation? Is there any data available on that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It all comes down to the price that you're selling at. I think for the large scale projects, utility scale projects, the margins are pretty low because they're really trying to be competitive with each other. And a lot of the players are actually these big international utilities or big international IPPs that have quite a bit of low cost financing that they can access for these projects. So for large scale projects, I think the margins are pretty low. For rooftop scale type projects, I think that also varies on what the customer is paying, but I've heard anything from like 10% returns to 20% returns, depending on the customer.
Question from my side. My name is Jeff Estras, and sorry for joining late. Do we see any regulatory type hindrances in South Africa for renewable energy and getting solar and other power sources connected back into the grid as sort of a competition for our primary supplier, Eskom?
Yeah, at the large scale applications, there does need to be some regulatory reform with Eskom themselves, because they do have a conflict of interest currently being both a generator and an off-taker, and the main off-taker. So they actually need to, at some stage, decouple Eskom's generation from its transmission distribution operations to remove that conflict of interest. So that's more of a market structure issue with some regulatory implications. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but there are regulations now for smaller scale installations, especially at the municipality level. A lot of municipalities have embedded generation tariffs, which allow you to sell some of that electricity back to the municipality. But there could still be more development on the national regulations for embedded generation.
Thank you. Look, maybe to sort of semi-answer Alicia's question. I mean, we've just been through an exercise, and we are currently in the process of implementing solar energy at our business. And we saw that the prices actually really varies quite a bit. We've approached a total of 6 service providers, and each one of them had a total different cost in terms of the cost per kilowatt hour peak. But I mean, it varies from give or take about 10 Rand to roughly about 14, 15 Rand per kilowatt hour peak, depending on the hardware that they use. And obviously, if you are placing the panels on a roof structure versus like parking structures, the roof structures are still the cheapest way to get energy at the cheapest cost per kilowatt hour peak. However, in long term, it might create some challenges in terms of maintenance, because your roof requires maintenance and painting, and every time we will have to get in the solar contractor or the one who does your O&M to remove those panels when you do roof maintenance. So it's sort of, we opted to go for the parking structures, and that they're working at much lower heights, and it's easier for us to maintain in the long term. So based on that, our return of investment was roughly about 7 to 10 years, depending on what the panels deliver. And the panels has got a total of 25 years usable lifespan. So that's in a nutshell, what it costed and what the pitfalls are. So does that answer some of your questions, Alicia? Good. Maybe just for Chris, I want to sort of just get your feel. How important it is nowadays to have an independent energy consultant such as yourself, rather than depending totally on the service provider to provide you the right information? Because it's quite a large investment. I mean, we're looking probably around about 7 to 10 million investment on our side. So it's not pocket money. So it's really important that you make sure that you don't get ransomed or get sold the wrong stuff. So how important do you think it is to have an independent consultant when you do go through these type of tenders or proposals?
Yeah, I think it depends. If you're installing on like a small scale installation, it's rather than an independent consultant, you probably would just get a few different quotes and compare them. But if you're doing larger installations, that's where I play a bigger role, typically on large scale transaction advisory type pieces of work, where you do need a third party to come in and give you more advice or do a due diligence on the project to make sure what you're investing in makes sense and based on the current agreements for the contract.
Okay.
Chris,
Mark, go for it.
A quick question, because this is Industry 4, future of renewables, tech issues. I'm thinking transmission and storage as obvious ones. What do you think are nice opportunities for us to do R&D, prototyping, seeing what's the future of renewables? Where can we dig around and maybe come up with some interesting solutions?
I think, you mentioned batteries, but coupling that with like a smart home system with smart appliances and seeing what you can do with your home network. And if you want to island your system and disconnect from the grid at certain times during the day for whatever reason, or to do that when there are outages and you have to do it, you're forced to do it. I think testing different applications for doing that in a smart way and in a digital way would be interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe to add on to something that Mark and probably answering some of his question as well. I've seen that there's a couple of new technologies starting to emerge. The one product that we had, it's not currently available in South Africa, which makes it quite pricey if you want to install it, is a product called Edge Blades, where it's a centrifugal blade that fits on the peak of your rooftops with a AC generator at the end. And that the benefit from that is it generates at as low as 3 kilometers per hour wind speeds, and when the heat hits the curve of the roof, it increases the speed. So you probably get about 9 kilometer hour wind speeds. And it runs 24 hours. So when the weather worsens, normally where your solar panels stop functioning, this specific system actually starts generating a lot more power. And they were looking where it generates in the vicinity of about 28 kilowatt per hour on a daily basis at wind speeds of about 6 kilometers per second, which is enough to power up all your small appliances and lighting at a home. And I think the current cost is about 160,000 Rand to get the once-off installed on your roof, which is actually not that expensive. But I see that could possibly be a nice addition to small homes and smart homes. But there's no local manufacturer. The guy came to us looking for a manufacturing solution. So maybe someone else is ready to run with that and try and set up an enterprise for new industry in South Africa.
Well, we can just install 4 in Cape Town, and with our wind, we can sort out the whole country.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Port Elizabeth will do even better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, does anyone else have any questions for Chris? That pretty much seems like it. Chris, we want to thank you very much for your input. It was really insightful. I hope that you were able to explain everything you like. And if you would like to find anything out from either one of the people in this session, we will record. This was recorded. We will place it on the website as well and send it out, distribute it amongst our mailing list. And then, I don't know, your contact details was in here. But where can people find you? How can they reach your business if they want to contact you?
Yeah, they can send me an email. It's probably the best way to reach me at chris@bluehorizon.energy. And my contact information, I guess, is also on my website if you want to go to bluehorizon.energy. Perfect.
Thank you very much. So I think that's a wrap for everyone. Thank you very much. We've got like 15 minutes to spare, but that's perfect. That gives me time to finish some work. Thank you very much, and hope to see you guys soon in our next session. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes.
All the best. Enjoy the rest of the week. Thanks, Jan.
Bye, guys.
And
Bye.
Alicia and Chris.